there will be control.
Okay, so this is going to be part 2 where I talk about my first 3 journeys with ayahuasca. So if you sat through the first one, thank you. And I guess just to quickly recap, so I'd had a bit of experience with cacao and then psilocybin and ceremony, and then I found myself in the jungle in Costa Rica, and ayahuasca presented herself to me. So I was really unaware of all of the preparation required. So the specific diet that you have to have before, I know I mentioned some in the last video, but I missed out. Dairy is quite a big thing. There's also other things that you have to abstain from. So it was actually really helpful to be where I was, because the preparation everyone was doing together. So I didn't really know what I was doing. I wasn't on my own for that. And then the first night of ceremony, we sat, so we had lunch and then no food after, and we sat around sunset, and there was, I don't know, somewhere between like 20 and 30 people maybe in ceremony, and there was the healer or the shaman or the curandero, whatever you want to refer to him as, and he had an assistant, and there were a few other people helping because it was a big group, so if anyone needed anything they could get it. And we all took it in. I sat closest to the toilet because I'd heard stuff about purging, and you have a bucket, but sometimes you purge the opposite direction. So I didn't know how in control I would be of myself. So I found the place that was closest to the toilet. And it was also at the edge of a circle, so there was only one person to one side of me. So yeah, that felt better. Anyway. So we sat down, and then you take it in turns to go up and drink the ayahuasca, and then you go back to your seat. And I had no idea what to expect, how long would it take, and what was going to happen. What I did know was I couldn't close my eyes. I didn't even really know that you were meant to, but I just sat there with my eyes wide open, just waiting for something. I don't know how much time becomes really irrelevant, which sounds weird, but I just don't know how long passed, but then I heard people starting to purge or vomit, and I was really confused because I didn't really feel much. And then I started having an internal dialogue with ayahuasca, and I asked her, why am I not being sick? What's going on? Is there something wrong? And the response I got was, because I've never met you before, it takes me some time to find out what we need to work with. And then time went on, and music was played, and there were people dancing, and yeah, it was a really beautiful experience. But then I started to have, I guess, memories. I feel like they're memories, things that I was unaware of, these feelings coming up, and I had to move, almost like Kundalini yoga. I was doing these wriggly things, and I didn't think that I could get up, I was just wriggling around, trying to shift energy. But quite aggressively wriggling, and I just couldn't settle. There were other people just lying down, and I couldn't. Yeah, and this went on for I don't know how long. I just have no concept of any sort of time. But then later on in the night, seemingly towards the end, I just felt something shifting, and it's almost this thing was coming up at me, and I wanted to get it out, and I kept sitting back down and just being lying back down and being oh yeah, I'm just going to listen to the music and whatever and relax. And then I had this thing of no, you're not here to do that. You're here to work on your shit. And then I'd sit back up again, and I'd start wriggling again, because that seems, for me, movement seems to be the way that I shift energy. And yeah, and then eventually I purged, so I vomited that first night, and it's weird. It's really difficult to explain. It's not like when you're ill and you're sick, or when you're drunk and you're sick. It's for me, it felt like the darkness in the depths of my soul was leaving my body. It's yeah, it's really, it's really difficult to explain, but it felt massively healing to vomit whatever it was out. Yeah, and then the ceremony ended, and people went and had soup, and I felt a bit wobbly, but yeah. So that one I feel was quite a gentle introduction, and I was almost proud of myself that I'd vomited. I'd ticked a box. which I'll come back to, because then I didn't vomit again for ages in ceremony. So the second night, I made some notes. The second night, we all sat down again, and there were different people. It was a slightly different mix of people, and there were a lot more men there. That's how it felt anyway. I had this just felt overwhelmed with masculine energy, and wherever I looked, it just seemed to be men. And anyway, we drank the ayahuasca, and there were people vomiting, and then there seemed to be at one point, like, the men had formed like an inner circle. It wasn't just men, but this was my perception, like an inner circle where they were singing and playing, because at some point the curandero will ask if anyone wants to sing, not in all ceremonies, but sometimes. And at this particular one, a lot of people had like taken instruments, and it was all like very professional. I actually sang at the end of the first ceremony. I forgot that bit. Like really quietly, something just came to me. I started singing this Hawaiian mantra, and yeah, and then he came up to me and he said, "Sing so everyone can hear." And like, I've always had this deep ingrained fear of singing in public, because this belief that I can't sing, and I love singing, but I've always like heard this repeatedly: you can't sing, you can't sing, you can't sing. So, but I did. I was just like, now or never. So, so I sang. Anyway, let's come back to the second night. There were all these men seemingly in front of me, just like a wall of men's backs, and I felt really uncomfortable, almost like suffocated by this masculine energy. And I had all this stuff coming up for me, and I was like crying, and I was like crying and crying and crying for the whole of the night. And actually I cried a huge amount for the next day. So my purging was crying, but it felt like tears that I hadn't shed in my life. Like at times in my life when I've been sad but I hadn't cried, it felt like those tears were all coming out. Like I was just crying the tears that I was meant to have cried. So it felt really relieving. It didn't feel like, I didn't feel sad. It's really hard to explain these things. It's like, it just felt like a huge relief. And at one point I remember, like, when I felt really suffocated by masculine energy and I was crying, someone came over to me, one of the female helpers, and gave me a really big hug, and it was like exactly what I needed in that moment. And then I sort of had this realization that you always have exactly what you need when you need it. Like, stuff just happens. Maybe not everyone believes that, but this is what I'm starting to believe in life, that things just happen just at the right time. If you trust and let go of trying to control, things kind of happen and unfold in a different way. When you try to control everything, then it's very different. So that was the second one, and I felt like super drained after that. Like, if we were doing 3 days in a row, there's no way I could have sat again the next day, because you finish at like, well, this one I think finished about like 1 o'clock in the morning, something like that. And yeah, there's just absolutely no way that I could have sat again the next day. So then back to my notes. So then after the ceremony, or even the next day, I was talking to people about this fact that I felt really trapped and that I felt really overwhelmed with masculine energy. And someone said to me, "Why didn't you move?" And like, you're kind of in control of your faculties with ayahuasca. Sometimes you're a bit wobbly. Like when I went to the toilet for a wee day, like I felt like, and I say wee because I'll come to that later on, it was like a big thing for me going to the toilet for a poo. And it was something that I would not do in ceremony, no matter how much I needed to. I had this barrier, a huge barrier, because, you know, people can't know about things like that. Like, women don't do that sort of thing. Anyway, when I went to the toilet, the walls were wobbly, the floor was wobbly, so you kind of need a bit of help, but you can get around. Or I could anyway. There were times when I couldn't. So in this particular ceremony, I could. And someone said to me, "Why didn't you move?" And I kind of pondered on that a bit, and I was like, because I didn't know I was allowed to. And then I realized I was sat there feeling like so uncomfortable and suffocated in this situation, waiting for someone else to tell me that I could move. And it's just such a huge reflection of how I've been in my life. Like, I've stayed in situations that I felt like so uncomfortable in, almost like I need permission to go. And I was like, oh, okay, like massive penny drop moment. Yeah, so that was my second. These are a while ago. Like, I would probably be more emotional talking about them had it been more recently, but this is quite a while ago now. It takes you a long time to process everything, but then also you forget some things. So the third ceremony, when we sat. The same thing happened again. I felt like suffocated by masculine energy, because there were people next to me, and there was a man next to me who was really, really lovely, but like when he purged, it was quite loud, and it triggered me a little bit, and I know now why, which came up in later ceremonies, that it's a reflection of my issues, that I don't want to be seen and I want to be quiet and I want to be small, that when someone else is like that, I used to find it deeply triggering. So I just felt like overwhelmed by all this stuff again, and then I remembered that I don't need permission to move. So I got up and I walked outside and I looked at the stars. We're kind of outside under a cover, but I went outside and I looked at the stars, and then I danced and I danced and I danced and I danced, and I felt in that moment inside, because I had no idea what I looked like to anybody else and I didn't care, I felt like the freest in my body that I've ever felt, and I felt like the most beautiful thing in the world. Like when I was dancing, I had like my limbs moved freely, and I had like no concerns about what it looked like to anybody else. And for me, the purge that night was movement and moving, and I danced, from what I recall, like pretty much the whole night I danced. I didn't have much in the way of visualizations or any sort of visual things the first few ceremonies, particularly. I think I didn't close my eyes, and there's a few other theories that I have, like I started using fluoride-free toothpaste and various other things for my pineal gland. So yeah, I think there's a few reasons why I didn't, but I couldn't fully let go. I couldn't fully let her in. I'd get to the point where I was like that was enough for me. I'd reached my limit, and I kind of think like you have these I have these internal conversations with ayahuasca, and kind of come to understanding about certain things, almost like bargaining with her, and sometimes she's a bit of a joker, has a sense of humour. But yeah, so I didn't have much visual stuff, but I felt like movement was my purge. So I vomited and I cried, and then it was dancing and movement. And then like I almost have had this like badge of honour, like I've only been sick once. I don't know, like your ego comes in sometimes, it gets smashed back down again, but it tries to come in. And at one point I was sat there and I was like, all of this is happening just for me. Like all these people are here, like the whole thing, it's like it's all just perfectly fallen into place, it's all just for me. And this is what my subconscious was telling me, and that's not like anything that I've ever experienced before. And I know that's like absolute rubbish, but you have these kind of like moments where you almost feel a bit like everything is just amazing, and almost like an elevated level of consciousness. And then you realise like that actually you're so tiny and you're so insignificant in the grand scheme of life, and that nothing really matters, and that everything is a load of rubbish, and like everything is an illusion. So you kind of go through these waves. I like, people talk about ego death, and I had like a bit of an ego death, but I still so much that I had issues with, and still now, like I'm getting there, but I'm far from perfect. I don't want to be perfect, but I'm getting to the point where I understand myself more. And for me, when you talk about healing, I didn't want to do all this stuff to find out like things that I've been holding on to, so I could be like, well, this happened to me, therefore now I'm like this, and I could put a label on myself and be like, I'm going to behave like this now because this is what happened to me. I wanted to get to the bottom of what was causing me to live a life that didn't feel in alignment with who I am. And that required me shifting all of these beliefs that I picked up along the way about who I was: shame, guilt, self-hate, self-loathing, low self-esteem, like all these kind of really negative things that you pick up. You can't do this, you can't do that, you have to do this, like you're in this box, you're in that box. Like I wanted to shed all of that stuff. And so this is basically what my healing journey is about. It's about uncovering the things that I've buried in my soul, in my human form, that are stopping me from actually living the life that I really want to live. Yeah, so I think that's enough for now. I'll just check my notes again. Yeah, I think that'll do for now. I will be back with, so that was my first 3 journeys. If you have any questions at all, I'm not going to get really specific about what happened to me in my past and about what stuff ayahuasca brought up, because I don't think that's relevant. It's more just about like sort of general stuff about my experiences. But if you have any questions, then stick them below and I will do my best to answer them.